Hello, everyone, and welcome to our January 2022 Roundtable discussion. We definitely didn't just record this and realize we weren't actually recording. So, yeah, this is completely from the top here. So I am Jean
The first
Brown.
one was really good too.
It was so good. So I am Jean Brown, and I have here with me Ginny Brown and Dr. Glenn Doyle. So how are you guys doing? How's 2022 treating you so far?
Good. It's just been cold in the Northeast here.
Yeah, cold here as well.
I don't know if you guys know, but Chicago has a bit of a reputation for a little bit of wind. It's living up to that rep. It's been brutal. It's been brutal here.
Otherwise, Dr. Glenn has already wiped out during a run, so that's where we're at for.
repeatedly.
Repeatedly.
Ice, baby.
Yeah. So in January, one of the things that Seek does is we have our annual board retreat. So we did that. We had to do it virtually this year, but we did that earlier in the month, and we have kind of a big announcement that came out of that meeting. So it's a big transition year for Seek. Ginny is going to be stepping down from the role of board president, and Glenn is going to be stepping into that role. Ginny is still going to remain on the board and with Seek, but it's gonna, we're looking forward to what that's going to do for us as an organization. So we'll talk a little bit more about kind of what we see coming out of that transition. But first, we want to talk a little bit about Ginny's time as board president. So Ginny, maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience in that role for Seek.
It's been a very interesting journey. I've learned a lot. I'm very glad that I had served on another board, so I had some understanding of what a board needed to do and what the responsibilities of a board president would be. This has been hard. This has been a hard journey. When we first started the organization, within 2 years, I had left paid employment and tried to just spend all my time and energy focused on the development of this organization. And in the very beginning, we did a lot of research. We did a lot of reaching out, tremendous amount of writing, a lot of the stuff that's on the website. I worked with Jean. We developed a lot of material, and often have felt like it was just sort of going out into the void. And I wanted to make sure that this organization endured, because what we've been trying to do goes way beyond our personal tragedy. We wouldn't have known about what happens in the self-help industry if Kirby hadn't died, and we didn't have this incredible, ridiculous event happen in our life, in her life, that never should have happened. So I think for us, trying to get just beyond our personal story to the broader industry and the broader issues has been difficult. And I think having Glenn take over as board president helps to make the point that we're not just about our loss. Our loss has opened a door for us to look at a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is, how does a smart, intelligent person get taken in? And then, are there really people out there that would exploit that? And the fact is, yes, there are. And there are charlatans in this industry. There's also great teachers in this industry. And I know, as a therapist and as a person with a spiritual, religious background, that we need to seek. Seeking is important. It's part of who we are as people, to want to grow and develop and expand. So our message has always been not to discourage seeking, but to help people do it with greater personal awareness, keeping their eyes open, keeping their heart open to the journey, but really paying attention to who they're listening to, what they're choosing to believe, and how that person is acting, whether it's really ethical and safe for them to engage in what's being suggested. So I think for me, I've learned a lot. It's been great to be part of an organization that's growing, but I really feel we're at a juncture. We're at a point where it's really important now to make sure that we get beyond our personal story and really address the broader issue. Most of our support has come from people who know and love us and have chosen to support us. But we really need to get the self-help community and people who provide in this industry to understand that we have a role to play to help them practice with greater fidelity, and for the individual who's on a journey to really pay close attention to where they're going and who they're listening to.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm delighted to have Glenn join us, because when we first met and I learned who he was and what his background was, I knew that he was going to help us get to that broader industry. And he's brought a lot of great things to the organization. So I'm really looking forward to handing the baton to him and letting him take over the leadership here. And, just super grateful to Jean for taking care of so many of important details in running this organization and managing things and helping its growth.
Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more with Glenn about, what he hopes to do with the organization. But before we do that, I think it's really important for us to recognize what you have accomplished and what you have done for this organization. So earlier late in 2021, before our Kirby Jam fundraising event, we had put together an impact statement. So I'll share that again, because I think that was great for us to share with our supporters, but also to look at ourselves. It talked about, it kind of brought together like some hard numbers to look at in terms of how many people we've reached, how many people have looked at some of the things we've put together, how many people have signed the Seek Safely promise. And that was a really great way for us to look at the fact that despite it being a difficult job that we've taken on, we really have had an impact. And, the other thing that I think about a lot when I think about what you've done for Seek, Mom, is I think back on right after Kirby died, you talked a lot about wanting to be Kirby's voice. And that is something that you have done in spades. You've been the voice of this organization. You've done so many media interviews, different productions on television, the podcast that you've done, the Guru podcast, the True Crime Profile podcast, so many different interviews. And then we wrote a book about it. You have given so much of your voice, including narrating that book as well. We have the audiobook now. You've given so much of your voice to tell this story. And of course, the story that we want to tell is not what happened, but what we've learned because of what happened. And that's really what Seek is. So I just want to say thank you. And I think it's really important for all of us to recognize what you have done.
Thank you, Jean.
You're welcome. So yes, as I said, we voted. Actually, I didn't vote. I'm not a voting member of the board, but the board voted to install Dr. Glenn Doyle as our board president. So, Glenn, maybe you can talk a little bit about your ambitions and and ideas for the organization.
Note that Jean goes out of her way to be like, I didn't vote for this guy.
It's true. It's true. I just want to make sure,
The board. It's the board.
We're all, yeah.
Seek Safely, kind of piggybacking on what Jean was saying about Ginny's legacy. Like, the creation of Seek Safely is just about the most Ginny and George Brown thing ever, because here was this awful thing that happened in Sedona, and the just devastating to any family. But because of who Jean or who Ginny and George and Jean are, they were determined that this pain serve some greater purpose. Again, I say it all the time, and I have no problem saying it for the second time today, that Ginny Brown is one of my heroes. So I think the organization that you created here is something that, it does go beyond the Sedona tragedy. It was something that has been necessary in the self-help space for decades. And I can tell you that as somebody who's been invested in the self-help space for decades. I've been into self-help since I was a teenager. I kind of credit self-help with really kind of, in some ways, saving my life. Mm-hmm. But anybody who has been involved in the self-help community for any length of time knows that while sure, there are these amazing resources in the self-help community provided by the self-help industry, it's also some deeply problematic spaces within that community and industry as well. And we know this, like, this isn't like secret knowledge. Like, we know that any industry that created itself around promising to make people feel and function better is going to be vulnerable to people who are willing and able to prey on people's insecurities. Mm-hmm. Right? So we've known that self-help has been problematic. It's one of the reasons why nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like trying to have a conversation with just people about self-help, and it could be like, oh, it's kind of that icky industry, right? They write the books in the section of the bookstore that nobody wants to be seen looking at, right? Like, you go to the self-help section of the bookstore, like, oh, I was looking at the cooking section, right? People feel kind of weird about discussing it. Mm-hmm. People feel really weird about acknowledging when it's been either helpful or hurtful to them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
there's a lot of shame there and reluctance to tell those stories. Yeah.
So there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of stigma. Mm-hmm. So big shoes to fill, kind of stepping into the leadership role of Seek, simply because, Ginny and George have kind of set such a tone that, we are not going to let, this pain and this tragedy really defeat us and define us. Mm-hmm. We are going to take what we have experienced and what we've learned, mm-hmm. Not just about the industry, but about, the people and the needs that the industry serves. Mm-hmm. We're going to take this and we're going to create something productive and something beautiful and something helpful out of that, which really is it's an organization in the mold of Ginny and George Brown. It's also an organization in the mold of Kirby Brown.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's what she was into.
Yeah, that's it. If we had just focused on, the anger, and there's a lot to be angry about when people are taken advantage of in this industry. But instead, we really chose to focus on, who Kirby was, in the sense of, there are so many people like her who are driven and motivated to get the best out of their lives. And they, turn to these resources to kind of help push them to that next point and that next thing that they're looking for. And we think that is amazing and incredible. So that's always where we've wanted to put the focus, not just on the bad stuff that happens, but on the idea of this search and this idea of seeking is important and it's beautiful. And we just want people to have that experience be a good one.
I love when I meet someone who says, I'm just like Kirby. I'm just like her. I would have been there too,
Yeah.
you know, and I think I would have pushed through. I think I would have played full on too.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that we're always looking for is not just how many people we've reached, but if we've reached you, what kind of difference did it make? Did it give you pause? Did it help you to evaluate that experience with a little more critical thinking or in a little greater depth? Those are the kinds of things that are really important to us, that I don't want anyone else to be harmed in this industry, because there's so much here that is great that can help people. So, being able to decipher what's going to be helpful and what's going to be harmful is really what's at the basis of what we've tried to do for this past decade, by persisting in this space, hoping that people would come to us before making big decisions of an expenditure of time and money, to evaluate those decisions in a real critical way that's going to keep them safe and is going to ensure that their investment of time and money is worth it.
Yeah, exactly.
So something that I talk about a lot, I think about a lot, is the relationship between the self-help industry and the self-help community, right? Like, so there's the industry that puts out all the books and the seminars and wellness products, all the herbal supplements, whatever. There's the industry, but there's the much broader community of kind of all the stakeholders kind of in the self-help world, from the people who consume self-help products and services to the various industries that are connected to the self-help industry. And something that I think about a lot is how the community has not always been well served by the industry, but the industry has very little incentive to change how it does business unless the community demands it. And I think one of the real wins of Seek Safely over the last decade, and that blows my mind to think about, the fact that it's been over a decade since Sedona happened, right? But I think one of the real wins of Seek Safely has been to put issues of ethics, accountability, and transparency on the radar of both seekers, consumers, but also those who produce and provide and profit from self-help products and services. So just taking James Arthur Ray as an example, he had no real incentive to be transparent, ethical, and accountable. Because again, we're talking about an industry that is famously historically unregulated. And we're talking about a community that has been sold this idea that those people who want us to be, transparent and ethical, they want to blow your trip. Right? They want you to be that. They're the haters and they're the trolls. That's why he blocks all of us on Twitter, right? And I think one of the real wins of Seek Safely has been putting these issues on the radar screen of not just the community, because we talk a lot about we want to be a resource to the community and we want people to be thinking critically and know what red flags are and whatnot. But we've also had and I mean hopefully continue to have an impact on the industry, because as long as the industry knows that the community is going to expect and demand more. That they're going to expect and demand the kind of ethics, accountability, and transparency that is kind of encoded in the Seek Safely promise. That's when we see real change in the industry. That's when we see pushes for the things like the legislation that's right now pending in the New York State Assembly.
Yeah. Yeah. So along those lines, one of the other things that we do at our annual board retreat is we look back on the previous year to assess what we did. We reflect back on the longer term goals that we've set for ourselves as an organization. And we set up our new goals and deliverables for the coming year. So so of course, like one of the first items on our list for the last few years has been our legislation. Every year we're kind of looking at, okay, is this going to be the year that it's finally going to go through? Because, the process of getting legislation passed is a long and complicated one.
Who knew?
Yeah. But we do have a lot of hope for this year. We had a number of meetings over the course of 2021 with our sponsors, with committee members, and other actors in the New York State legislature. So we feel pretty confident that our bill is pretty strong, and our sponsors are ready to put it to a vote. So we're hopeful that that's going to come up. At that point, we're going to be asking for a lot of help to have people, especially New York State residents, contact their legislators to make them aware of the bill and why they should be supporting it. So watch for that. Hopefully that will be coming up soon. And as always, I want to mention our board member and my uncle, Tony Kirby, who is the legislative guy for Seek Safely, and he really has done just so much work to keep pushing that. So another goal.
My favorite part, by the way, like my favorite part of Seek Safely has been a resource for the legislators and the legislative assistants who are kind of crafting the language and whatever. My favorite part of these meetings is when we're told in one meeting, "Oh, we hate everything about it." We were told that by I think it was by a staff member at some point, "Oh, the language is problematic and there's no precedent for it and it's no chance." And we're like, well, okay, we want to help change what needs to be changed. We're kind of at our wits' end. We're like, man, we've been working on this for 2 years, only to be told a couple months later, it's it's fine. It's fine. We're gonna send it. Don't even worry about it. It's like I'm reminded of the Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a bill. Like how a bill becomes a law.
Exactly.
We're seeing how the sausage is made.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's it's a tricky process. I have a background in public policy, so I was sort of aware of how challenging it would be. But it's another aspect of when it's an issue that's not necessarily on everyone's radar, it can be challenging as well. And we feel like that is also changing too at this point, that people are becoming more aware of the need for this legislation. So
to kind of contextualize, just very quickly, to kind of contextualize for our anybody watching, why this legislation is so important, why legislation at all is so important. If you look at what happened with Nexium and Keith Raniere, it's insane that the state had to kind of bend over backwards to find charges to convict him on, right? They really did. They kind of had we can make a trafficking charge work if we can prove that state lines were crossed and whatever.
Creative prosecution.
But the truth is, Nexium was a self-help org. No one joins a cult, they join self-help personal development orgs. And parts of what they were doing should have been illegal from the beginning. And to take another example, James Arthur Ray, famously is convicted of negligent homicide, serves less than 2 years, and goes right back into the industry. Those are examples of things that shouldn't happen. In any sane world, they wouldn't happen. So it's not that we are that Seek Safely and others who are demanding transparency and accountability from the self-industry. It's not that we hate the industry and we just want it regulated because we love regulations. The fact is, in the real world, any industry, teacher, whatever that can impact your life this much, should have some accountability.
Right.
If as a psychologist I did what some of these teachers did, if I did, what Keith Raniere or James Arthur Ray did, they would take away my psychology license and I would never be let near a patient again, as it should be.
Yeah.
And these are the stakes. It's really that important.
Right. Yeah. Right. And that will definitely be part of, Ginny and George's legacy, because that was one of the first things that we identified after Sedona happened, was like, how can it be that, we regulate so many other things for professionalism, so that when a doctor or a psychologist
Or
does
a
something that
barber.
or a barber, yeah, or an electrician, like does
Yeah.
something that harms somebody or is negligent, that there's, some recourse to not just to punish them, but to protect other people, to demand more
Right.
from
Right.
that profession. And so that was, one of the first things that we identified. So again, part of, Ginny and George's legacy will be when we have this legislation passed, because we started pushing that from the beginning. So yeah, that's one of our big hopes for 2022. Other goals that we've set for ourselves. Last year, we had started this roundtable. We started out doing, videos on YouTube and Facebook. But the whole idea was that eventually we wanted to create like a proper podcast. So we're hoping that by June, we have maybe a 10 or 12-part series that we can start out with as a podcast to do the same things we've done with this roundtable. In the past year, we had some great guests on. We had Sandy Galliff to talk about the legislation. She's our assembly sponsor. We also had some coaches talk about their field and the idea of the ethics that, their field is trying to create for coaching standards. So we're looking to do more of that kind of thing and put it into a podcast for people. We also have some other productions and products in mind that we'd like to put together for people. So last year we had done a sort of seeker empowerment event. We created a tool, like a little compass tool for people to use kind of at the outset of their self-improvement journey, as a way to get a real clear sense of your goals for that kind of self-improvement work, so that you can kind of protect yourself and make sure that you're not going to be pushed in different directions by various teachers or programs. So we're going to put that tool into a book that will be available to people. And we'd also like to hold another one of those events.
Mm-hmm.
And then another goal that we have for ourselves is sort of deepening and expanding our collaborative relationships, both with seekers and then other actors in the industry. I think, like Glenn was talking about, the idea of, you have this self-help providers and the self-help community. I think we want to add another layer to that. And we want to be, kind of a layer where we're sort of working above it all to help seekers evaluate and help self-help providers be better at what they're doing. So we know that there are other people out there kind of trying to do that work as well, and we're hoping to build more of those connections. So does that summarize pretty well our goals that we put together at our board retreat, would you say?
I think so. I think we're at a real critical juncture, and I think Glenn really represents that.
Mm-hmm.
That, getting beyond our personal story and support for us personally, and really helping people really get that we're looking at this broader picture, bigger issue about having ethical, safe, productive journeys for individuals.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to reinforce the idea that, sure, the driving force behind the creation of Seek Safely may have been, look, no more Sedonas.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really important something that we have learned so well over the past 10 years of researching and being involved as part of the self-help landscape, is that the Sedonas or the Nexiums, whatever, those are the things that we all hear about because they hit the headlines.
Mm-hmm.
And when
They're
they do hit the
dreams.
like when they do hit the headlines, I think there's kind of a sense of like, well, okay, but like those are outliers, right?
Yeah.
And sure, some of those outcomes are outliers. But let's keep in mind that the real problem within self-help is not necessarily people dying in sweat lodges or getting branded in sex cults. There is financial and emotional exploitation that happens on every level of the industry. Now, it's not what happens most, but it's something that I think has really flown under the radar screen because, again, like there's been kind of this stigma and this reluctance to really engage with and talk about this industry. So, I mean, a real purpose that I envision Seek Safely, serving, continuing to serve, and really expanding our role. Like when Jean talks about expanding our relationships and our collaborations, I'm really thinking of, gosh, there are so many stakeholders in the world with self-help. Some of them don't even know they're stakeholders, because I guarantee if you're watching this, you're probably into self-help anyway. But everybody has somebody or knows somebody who is into self-help, who has paid money for a self-help product or service, right? This is an industry that really, gosh, I keep, when I was in high school and Bill Clinton was president, like I remember like the second year Bill Clinton was president, or maybe the first year that Bill Clinton was president, and things were not going well. Who did he summon to help him with this? He brought to the White House Tony Robbins and Stephen Covey and I think Marianne Williamson, right? Like he had it, like, one of Tony Robbins' big shtick is like, yeah, I've counseled presidents. I've counseled world leaders. Like this is an industry and a culture, the reach of which I think is really underappreciated.
Yeah. And one of the things we've talked about before is we're sort of like passively consuming a lot of this stuff. We don't even realize it. But if you're on social media, I mean, if you watch TV, like if you're out in the world at all, you're seeing a lot of these messages. And a lot of times people, get into a program or get into a teacher not even having intended to, because it's just something a friend sends to them or something they happen to see on Instagram, and they're like, oh yeah, that it resonates with them. And so we try to talk about that a lot as well. Even when people don't think they're into self-help, they're still seeing it everywhere.
Well, and we're getting messages just being part of a capitalistic democracy that is constantly encouraging us to be more, to upgrade, to have more, to have better. So that message that you're not enough is a huge message that comes across in self-help. You're not enough. You need to be more. You need to go to another seminar. You need to buy another book. You need to try harder. You need to do more of this or more of that. And so I think it is very subtle, but totally pervasive in our cultural experience, and really important for people to be aware of that.
Yeah.
And part of what makes that so heartbreaking, to just kind of piggybacking on that, part of what makes it so heartbreaking is those messages really prey upon what I consider to be some of the best impulses in humanity. Like we really want to be better parents and partners, and we really want to provide, like we're doing a job, like we really want to provide value to that job, and so like there are these things that make human beings human, because there's always going to be a market for anybody who says, yeah, man, I can improve your experience, I can make you a better version of you. There will always be a market for that. That's one of the reasons why I think it's so important that an org like Seek exists as part of the self-help landscape, because it would have been really easy for you guys, for your family, it would have been really easy after Sedona to say, look, self-help sucks and they're all charlatans, and there's nothing of value here.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is, the industry and the community is always going to exist as long as that impulse to be and feel and do better
Mm-hmm.
are. So, I mean, you very realistically acknowledged
Mm-hmm.
that man, it's not an option just to say, well, no, look, we have to ignore that impulse in humanity, and we have to ignore the fact that there will always be products and services that will cater to that. We said we have to be realistic about how we can help make people's journeys safer and more productive and more effective. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think, the last thing we want to kind of talk about is we're excited about this point of transition. We're at a moment of transition as an organization, but I also really see a bigger transition in the context that we find ourselves. Over the last couple of years, I think the social conversation has kind of opened up. As Ginny was talking about, for a long time, it was really frustrating for us. We felt like we were constantly trying to justify why we were even doing any of this, why it was important to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like we were just kind of there on our own, chipping away at a giant boulder that nobody else could even see. And it feels like we're at a moment where people are ready to hear these stories without judgment. And so part of that, I think, is that we've, over the last couple of years, we've all experienced seeing people that we know and love throughout the pandemic and through this political climate that we're in right now. People kind of suddenly adopting sort of extreme thought patterns and ideas really quickly. And I think a lot of us have become aware of how easy that process is to be taken in by something. There's also been a lot of new storytelling, both about Sedona and about other incidents. So again, the Guru podcast, the True Crime Profile podcast that we were involved in, and then all of the things that have come out about NXIVM. The Vow on HBO, Seduced on Stars. One of the things that was so good about those productions is that they put the focus not just on the sort of grisly details about what happened in Sedona or what happened with NXIVM, but they put the focus on the question of how. How can people be taken in by these kinds of coercive control groups and leaders? And as a result of that, I think people are, again, ready to talk about this in a different way than we've talked about it before. So yeah, I've been really sort of heartened by watching those types of productions, shifting the focus away from the salacious details. And that is something also that we tried to do in our memoir, This Sweet Life. Our book, it doesn't just tell the story of what happened to Kirby in Sedona. It tells the story of what we learned after the fact and our process of coming to an understanding of how it happened and why it happened. So I'm getting really sort of excited and inspired by the fact that I feel like we're not the only ones who are trying to talk about these issues.
Yeah.
I've been listening to the podcast A Little Bit Culty, which is by Sarah Edmondson and her husband Nippy Ames, who are involved in NXIVM. And it's awesome. They have all different kinds of guests on the show who have also been involved in coercive control groups and cult type groups. And again, they're not just talking about the details of those groups, but they're talking about the stories of how and why they got involved in them, how they got out, and now what they're doing to raise awareness about these groups and these issues. And again, like we felt alone for a really long time in trying to teach people about this, but I finally feel like we're not alone anymore. And it's, giving me a lot of hope and giving me a lot of excitement for pushing forward. So, yeah.
Giving Sarah Edmondson and Mark Vicente and Catherine Oxenberg and kind of everybody who helped make this, like especially the Vow, kind of the cultural phenomenon that it was, kind of giving them due credit. Something I think both the Vow and the Seduced series on Stars did really well was discuss not just the end result of this kind of coercive control dynamic, but they really discussed the kind of step by step, how people were drawn into this situation based upon the promise of self-improvement, and self-improvement that at the outset looked pretty benign, right? Like, what's the worst that happens? You go to see a motivational speaker. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're not going to be motivated? Come on, right? So I think there's you read a book and you don't like the book. What's the worst that's going to happen? And so I think, Gene, what you're talking about in terms of the greater visibility of these dynamics and these situations in the culture, I think are really due to some of these individuals really coming forth, Mark and Bonnie, and really talking about how, man, like, we're smart people, like we're not desperate people.
Yeah.
Something I talk about a lot. If you follow my social media, I talk a lot about the fact that healing of any kind requires a little bit of suspension of disbelief, right? Like when we're hurting or we're hopeless, part of that is often this idea that, man, like, do I really believe anything can help? And in order to engage with anything, whether it's self-help or psychotherapy or psychiatry, whatever, you kind of have to suspend disbelief, like you can for a minute. Like, you kind of have to be like, okay, I have to suspend that hopelessness and maybe believe in something. And a lot of these providers are a lot like therapists insofar as we're kind of in the position of saying, you know what, you're safe with me to suspend that disbelief, right? Like, I'm not going to exploit you. I'm not going to hurt you. Like, if you trust me with this and you suspend your disbelief, and that's, I think, really the central dynamic that we're all at Seek Safely, we're constantly returning to. That, look, if somebody is going to ask you to suspend your disbelief in such a way that your life can be affected, they owe it to you to be both ethical and accountable and transparent.
So, we find ourselves at this moment in our larger context and at this moment as an organization. And I think we're really excited for the year to come.
We are.
So again, we want to say thank you to Ginny for serving as board president for so many years. And we're excited now, Glenn, to have you come on as our president. Yay. And so that's pretty much it for this month. Watch for everything that's coming up, including February 8th. We have the Toast to Kirby that we do every year on her birthday. And other than that, watch for everything that we've got in store for this year. So thank you for listening. Please like and share and do all those things. Subscribe that you're supposed to do for our production to help get the word out.
Find Seek Safely on Twitter at Seek Safely. Find me on Twitter at Dr. Doyle Says.
That's it.
Find Gene at Gene C. Brown.
That's right.
Okay.
And all right. Thank you. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Later, taters.